Hey, 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 we're back, we're black, we're brown. Ambition, 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 ambition. I'm excited because today in the stew, we have some extra brown in the studio today. We have the one, the only civil rights lawyer, Obama White House alum, education leader running to fight for the village that raised him. He currently represents over 1.1 million neighbors on the Montgomery County Council, Will Yemi Jawando.
Yay.
It's just Will to me. So if you remember a few weeks back, depending when you're listening to this, I did a wealth walk in Maryland. It was awesome. It was like, I want to say over 80 or so people came for the physical walk, and then over 100 stayed for the talk part at the end. It was with Will. It was amazing. Will we know in our community, health is a huge component, but also wealth as well. So we combined the two. And it was just, we walked at this where was that park, Will? What was that park, Will, called?
That was Wheaton Regional.
So we walked to this beautiful park called Wheaton Regional. And then afterwards, we talked about not just money, but money as related to what Will's specialty is, which we'll get into today. And so that was just so awesome. And I wanted to have Will back on. He also is an author of this awesome book called My 7 Black Fathers, right? Or Lessons from My...
You got it.
Mm-hmm.
No, you got it. You got it right the first time.
Yeah, so you might have seen it in Target. I know I have many a times, but also obviously, yes, bring it up. See, if you watch the YouTube channel, you could see it, right? And so Will is awesome. I've known him, his amazing wife, Michelle. They've got, is it 3 or 4 girls you have now?
We have 3 girls and a boy.
3 girls and a boy, right? And
in that order.
They kept trying for a boy. That's what it's giving. And so Will is just an awesome resource. And I can't wait for you guys to hear from him. So welcome to the studio, Will.
Well, it's great to be here. And thank you. And that was such an amazing walk. And thanks for having me on the show.
So Will, tell us currently, what do you currently do for a living now? But then what kind of have you done that has brought you to this place? Because I want people to get a context of who you are as we start to talk about money.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm on the Montgomery County Council. I'm a council member at large, which all that means is just a fancy way of saying I'm elected countywide. And as you mentioned in the lead-in, I represent 1.1 million residents in Montgomery County. There's 6 million people in Maryland, and I represent 1.1 million of them. I'm in my second term. I chair the Education and Culture Committee, which oversees our school system and our community college and arts and culture programming. And as I know I'm also running for the United States Senate. So to represent all 6 million people in the U.S. Senate. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm also a lawyer. I'm a civil rights lawyer, but I'm full-time as a council member, public servant on the Montgomery County Council, which is the community I grew up in and where Michelle and I are raising our kids.
One question about your wife, Michelle, who's awesome, by the way. Is Michelle an attorney as well?
She is. Yeah.
Them kids don't even realize what they got. They got 2 black lawyers in the house. Okay. If you follow Will on social media, their family is just so beautiful. Michelle is beautiful. Their girls are beautiful. His son is beautiful. It's just when people say back in the day, that's a good black family. Right.
Well, I tell you, one time I saw Dick Gregory, God rest his soul, right, when I was working in the Obama White House. And I think we had 2 kids at the time, and our 2 girls. And he grabbed me and he looked me dead in the eyes and he said, "You keep having those beautiful black babies." Yes. And I said, "Yes, sir." And then we went and had 2 more. So we try to do our part.
Yes, I love that. So one of the things that came up during the wealth walk that I just thought this comes up a lot, is that sometimes, especially we as Black and brown people, we feel like we can't play a role in what happens to us externally. That yes, I can do my budget at home and I can save, but as far as what happens federally, what happens in my state, what even happens in my county is kind of out of my hands other than voting, right? But is that really true that there's nothing that we can do? We just have to suffer as a result of whatever choices are made by the powers that be?
Yeah, that's a great question and a great point. I mean, no, the short answer is no, it's not true. And let me tell you why. Voting is certainly important, right?
Mhm.
People fought and died for that right. There's a reason there's people still attacking it and trying to take it away from whole groups of people, whether they be returning citizens who have been in jail or prison, or whether it's modern day literacy tests where you have to make all these hoops where people have to jump through and moving their polling stations. All that stuff is still happening today.
Mhm.
So the vote is important, but there's so much more
Okay.
than that. It's actually being engaged with who you vote for, right?
Okay.
Going to the council hearing, right? I often tell people, my county council, we have a $7 billion budget,
Mm.
and that money comes from you. It
Mm.
comes from the people that pay taxes, right? Either property taxes or sales tax or income tax. And so you should absolutely, and we should absolutely be engaged in directing that money. And then we set the rules of the road too. We also do all the laws, right?
Mm.
How fast can you go on the road, right? You care about your kids not getting hit, go fight for a lower speed limit. That's what we
Mm.
decide that too.
Mm.
Um, and then you talk about land use, maybe the biggest of all of them.
Mhm.
Where are things built? How are they built? Who is allowed to build? Who
Mm.
gets money to help them build? If you talk about wealth, certainly owning property is kind of a bedrock principle. I know
Yes.
as of that, and so the state, local, and federal government are involved in all of that. And so it's definitely, and you have the squeaky wheel does get the oil. The people
Mm.
who show up are the people who get paid attention to. That's human nature. And so we certainly have to vote. We have to be present. We have to hold people accountable who we elect
Mhm.
and advocate for things that are going to improve our community. So I just think absolutely uh, it matters, and you have a right to do it, and not just a right to engage with elected officials. You have a responsibility, and it's directly connected to the health and wealth of yourselves, but also your entire community.
So let's do like a walkthrough because people ask me this all the time. So I got the law A. Well, I didn't get it, but I helped to introduce A1414, the Budget Needs to Law
Absolutely.
in the state of New Jersey, making financial education mandatory for middle school students because New Jersey already has a law for high school students. So I'm not gonna lie, it was I'm thankful to my assemblywoman Angela V. McKnight, who came to me and said, let's do something together. But I think the vast majority, even me, I was not really clear on the process. I had to literally, I think I watched the Schoolhouse Rock. I'm just a bill sitting on. So
Right.
I think a lot of people don't realize that, wait, you can get help to get a law passed. Can you walk us through the literal, okay, you have an idea and you think that maybe there's no financial education in your state and your what's the process of creating a change through legislation? So what would somebody do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually created a nonprofit to help people in low income communities do just that. Like
Mm.
we called Our Voices Matter.
Okay.
And what we did is we went to the six lowest income census tracts in Montgomery County, where I represent, and we had a community town hall. And
Okay.
we said, hey, what are issues? And we had incentives. We had so this is kind of like step one in the process. You got to get together
Okay.
either with yourself or community members, and talk about what you want to see change,
Okay.
right? You have to have an idea of what you're trying to accomplish, right? And it could be something like, I want to change the law for financial literacy like you did, or it could be, I want uh, the door at my middle school, I want the security door fixed
Okay.
so it's not hanging open. That was one issue we helped some community members with.
Okay.
So it could be anything. So identify those needs
Hmm.
and within your community. And now it could be an individual, because
Okay.
individuals, but it could be, I think it's stronger if you can get with a group and, on that. Then you, do the research on who are the decision makers, right? Who are the people that decide that issue? So depending on what it is, it could be a local, a state, or a federal issue, or it could be all three.
Okay.
And in the case of a school door, it's going to probably be the local school board, right?
Okay.
So we identified with that group. So what you do is you identify the issue,
Okay.
you know, gather with people who care about it, then look up and research who the decision makers are. So those are your council people, your city council, your state. You should just automatically know if you go into any, vote.org and to type in, uh, your zip code, your address, it'll tell you who your elected officials are. So you
Okay.
know at every level, right? So at federal, state, and local level.
Okay.
And then reach out to all of them and just, write a letter or show up or look better yet, or do all three of these things. Write them a letter,
Hmm.
write them an email,
Hmm.
then show up to to a public hearing. A
Okay.
lot of these, like we have people that come, they can, testify for 3 minutes on a topic. They come and they say why they're here and what they hope to see. That's the first step in the process, bringing it to the attention of the elected officials.
Okay. Okay. So that's great. So that's why. So
That's first step. There's more steps, but I'm
no,
pausing
I
because
like
there's a
that.
lot. Yeah.
Okay. So let's just say, so that happens. Angela came to me and was like, "Hey, Tiffany, I want to do something." I guess she was on the education committee. So I didn't have to do any writing. I just kind of gave, to your point, from my space of expertise, this is what should be appropriate for middle school students. Then
Right.
Angela went to her team and started to craft like what a bill. So you don't have to do that as
Correct.
like not you, I'm saying like you
Yeah, the
listening.
person.
Yes,
Yeah.
So then, you find your elected official and you tell them kind of the components of the bill, of the proposed bill, and they will craft something together. And oftentimes they'll bring it back to you where I'm thinking, because Angela brought it back, she was like, "Do you mean like this?" And I was just like, yes, that, because for me, it was important as a former teacher. Well, I'm still a teacher, but like a former school teacher,
Right.
that it
You're
didn't put.
teaching a whole bunch of people.
And I wanted a law or a bill that didn't put undue stress on the teacher. And so there was
Right.
language in there that was like integration into the day versus like you had to stop and say money time, and like teach. So I knew that language is important. So she might not have known that because she was not a school teacher. And so Angela came to me, said, "Here's the language of this proposed bill." Then I remember something distinctly about she had to get like some stakeholders on board. So she got like a group of superintendents. Is that part of it too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you bring up a really good point. So yes, your job is not to necessarily draft the language.
Mhm.
Obviously, if that's your skill set, there are people that come to us, that have language and they're like, we want this to be drafted.
Mhm.
But most people just have something they want to see happen.
Mhm.
And so then we take and work with our lawyers and our legislative councils and within our offices, and we draft the legislation.
Mhm.
But the part that you're talking about next is really critical.
Mhm.
The stakeholder engagement,
Yes.
right? Getting people behind. That's why I said if you start out with a group at the beginning,
Mm.
because that you've already created one of your first stakeholder groups, right?
Okay.
And if it can be, the parents and the teachers association, the
Mhm.
teachers union, and the more work you can do throughout the beginning and throughout the process to get others to agree that, hey, we need to do this, that are not the electeds,
Okay.
right? That is what ultimately will move the electeds to do it.
Okay.
If you have a broad coalition, and so you often heard the term, "There's no new ideas under the sun,"
Mhm.
right? There's a lot of ideas that have been proposed and are out there, but who can build the coalition
Mm.
of people that can create the energy behind, when Dr. Martin Luther King was pushing for the Voting Rights Act in
Mhm.
1965, there's famous conversations, and this has happened multiple times throughout our history, where he's talking to the president and they're like, "We need to do X, Y, and Z." And the response back was from the president to Dr. King and others was, "Well, go make me do it."
Mm.
So you have to have the stakeholders in the community asking for it. So that's where the organizing part happens.
Okay.
And the good thing about that is when you do that, you improve the legislation, you improve the policy because you
Yes.
get feedback. Just like you
Yes.
said, she took it to you and you're like, well, it has to be integration. So we don't want to,
Yes.
the teachers are going to tell you this, the superintendent's going to tell you
Yes.
that, the community member will tell you that. And then through that process, you get a better product
Mhm.
that will because ultimately you want something that will have buy-in, right?
Yes.
Because there's been a lot of laws that have been written that if they don't have buy-in, they're not going to be implemented well,
Mhm.
and people aren't going to believe in them. And you're never going to totally avoid that.
Mhm.
But the more work you do on the front end and through the process to get other people's input that are impacted, the better the end product will be. And you're building momentum for passage.
And that's exactly what happened, to your point, that I think it was like they initially wrote it and the teachers pushed back and said, "Oh, we already have too much in the educational day." And I said, "You know what? They're absolutely right. I totally forgot, Angela. I think that integration is better because I already have to do story time. But imagine like I just pick one book a week. That's a money book. So I'm not
Right.
creating a whole new segment. It's like I'm already reading anyway. I'm already
Right.
doing art projects. Maybe one of those art projects is a piggy bank made out of a shoebox, you
Right.
know? And so like,
Exactly.
so, okay, no, okay. So I love that part. It's like, okay, so you get your buy-in and there, Will is, half Nigerian, but we're going to claim all of you. But, and so there's an
I'll take
African,
it.
there's a African proverb that says, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you go with others. And so that illustrates that point. So we got that buy-in with the community. And then I remember her saying something like, now it has to go to committee. So what
Right.
is that?
So the bill's introduced. Like you said, a bill, just a bill, like schoolhouse rock. The bill's introduced by a council member or a assembly person, whatever the vehicle, the level of government is, or a congressperson or a senator. And then it goes to, normally what happens is there's a public hearing
Okay.
at the local level. And that's what we have. So 2 weeks after we introduce the bill, and this is common for a lot of local and state legislation, there's a hearing on it, and it goes to committee. And in this case, if we're talking about this, it'd be probably an education committee
That's what
bill.
she said. Yep.
And I chair that committee for my council. So it would go to us, and then we would review it, right? And we would call witnesses and have people there, like the school system, maybe some of the teachers, the advocates, people who have advocated on this bill, and then start working through the legislation. And maybe there's amendments offered, and like, well, let's change this language to this, or let's do it this way. And so it could be one or two committee sessions or more, depending on how complicated the issue is. Then it would be voted out of committee.
Okay.
And so it would hopefully receive a positive vote. In our case, we have 3-person committees because we have an 11-member council, so you have to have 2 people agree to move it forward.
Okay.
So say it comes out, then it goes to the full body. So in our case, 11-member council. It could be bigger if it's the full state legislature of New Jersey or whatever. It would go to hundreds of people. But then it's reported out of committee favorably or unfavorably, and then it's voted on by the full council, and then it would be passed. Now if it's a state legislature, it has to go through the House and the Senate.
That's what she was telling me. Yeah. So tell us about that. I remember she was like, it had to go to the House, and then it had to go to the Senate. So what does that look like?
So at the state and federal level, you have an executive. At every level of government, you have an executive, a legislative, and a judicial. The executive signs the laws and implements them. The legislative passes the laws, and then the judicial reviews and says what's constitutional. Kind of reviews the laws to see if they're in line with the Constitution. In the legislative branch, which we're talking about now, at the state and federal level, it's comprised of 2 houses, usually a House and a Senate. So you have the House of Representatives at the federal, you have the U.S. Senate. At the state level, you have some people call it assembly, some people call it delegates, but there's a House and then there's a Senate. At the local level, at the county or municipal level, often there's one body that's everything.
Okay.
So there's 11 council members. We have committees, but the body of the whole, there's no Senate. It's just if the council passes it, they send it to the mayor or the county executive and they sign it or veto it.
Okay.
And so at the state level, you have a House and Senate. And in those cases, you have to get it through one chamber, and then the bill goes over to the other chamber, the Senate, and is passed. And then it goes to the executive, which would be either the president at the federal level, the governor at the state level, or the mayor or county executive at the local level. And they would sign it, and then it becomes law.
Well, you were just too. I hope y'all getting it's a whole history lesson or whatever. You're welcome. So I remember distinctly. Now I'm like, things are coming to me. I remember that one of the things that the Assemblywoman did is that because she is a Democrat, I think she found somebody across the aisle. So like a Republican to co-sponsor the bill, I believe.
Yes.
And so because to your point, if we can get more people to say we're on board, you have less likely to have this kind of pushback.
Exactly. It's something we need more of in the Congress right now, that I want to do when I get to the Senate is work across the aisle on things that you can work across the aisle on, right? Like you're not going to agree on everything. Like I always tell people all the time, Michelle, my beautiful, amazing wife, we don't agree on everything. So, and we've decided to be life partners. So of course we're not going to agree with everyone we're working with on everything, but you can get to a place where you're agreeing on the majority of it and the intent of the legislation. And so that's part of that process when you're working on, building your stakeholders and building your support, uh, you want those folks to also reach out to other members of the legislative body to tell them why, because it's just like in like influencing. If I tell you, if I'm trying to convince you, that has some effect. But if other people from who have a different interest than me come to try to convince you, that's going to have a different impact. So, but a lot of times, even before you introduce the bill, like your assemblywoman did, she was like, well, let's give it a better chance if we can make it bipartisan or get more co-sponsors. The more people you have, if I'm going to introduce a bill on my council, there's 11 members. It needs 6 votes to pass. If I can get 6 co-sponsors on it at the beginning, that means it's going to pass. So it's kind of a also, trying to do that work on the front end.
No, this is great. And so just so you can, so in the beginning, the bill that, I helped to work on, it was for elementary and middle school. It did all of that. It went to committee, it went to the House, went to Senate. Then it got to, at the time, Governor Christie's desk. He said he would sign it. He did not. And that was his last year in office. So it was literally, it got on his desk right before he was leaving office. He did not sign it. And at least in the state of New Jersey, an unsigned bill is basically vetoed. Like it's just, it's gone.
Right.
So we brought it back to the table. And this time there was this new pushback where they didn't want the elementary school component. So went all the way through. They're like, take off that elementary school part. I said, fine. She said, fine. And then it got to Governor Phil Murphy's desk. And at the time he was out. So Sheila Oliver, who is our, what is that called? What do you call when you're like, it's almost like governor in second governor. No,
lieutenant governor.
I'm like, second governor. So lieutenant governor. So it was awesome because we got to, like, what was great about it, since it was middle school, they picked a middle school in Newark called the Barack Obama Middle School, which I loved. And so, right, the kids got to watch her sign a bill into law, which was really awesome. And I got to be there. Of course, my mama was there, as a Nigerian, she was like, hey,
of course,
my daughter has made the law. I was like, she was actually mad, Will, because you'll know this about Nigerians, that they wouldn't let her talk on stage. I'm like, mommy, why would I'm your mother. I was like, Sylvia, honestly, just sit down. So that was an amazing experience.
What's wrong with these people?
I love my people. So knowing that, and, you are wanting to make this shift from local government to state government. You said something that was really powerful, because I don't live in Maryland. And I remember being like, well, not why should I care, but why should I care if you're the senator or who our senator was? But then you told me something that was really powerful. Do you want to share, if you remember? Like, why does it matter if I live in New Jersey, who the senator in Maryland is?
Well, there are only 100 senators, right? So there's 2 from each state of the 50 states. We need to get DC 2 senators. They should be a state, but that's a separate issue. And so, but we vote on, the U.S. Senate votes on things that affect the whole country. Your freedom to have your own reproductive health care, right? The tax rate you pay, the funding for education that comes from the federal government, imagine any of those laws. So all 100 senators, no matter what state they're from, are voting for those things. They're voting to confirm Supreme Court justices and all the judges that decide what rights we have. That's why certainly it should matter for the voters of Maryland, but it should matter for everybody, because the control of the Senate, who's in there, what their priorities are, what they're doing, and the House is the same way. It affects those 535 people, 435 in the House and 100 in the Senate, along with the president, are deciding things for the whole country, all 300 million plus of us. And so that's why that should have mattered to everybody.
That was really powerful. I had not thought about that, because you're right. We are currently seeing now, some of our laws being stripped right in front of us in ways that we could have never imagined. And it's as a result of who currently is in the Senate. And of course, I think people just think, like, as long as I vote for president, that's what matters most. But,
no.
You shared something during the Wealth Walk that, like, where you can really flex your most political power is your local government.
Absolutely. And not only can you flex the most power there, because like I said, we just ran through that process, right? You get some people in a room, you show up. There's a force multiplier when people show up that don't normally show up, because people are like, oh, what's going on here? Like, they're used to hearing to the people that always show up, the lobbyists and the people that are always the squeaky wheels. But you get 10 or 15 people to show up from a Black or brown community talking about an issue that have never been there before. And people are going to be like, what's going on? And that's the power of democracy. And not only that, we'll take the example of the law you passed. When you're successful and you change and pass a local law, that is what we at the federal level are often looking for as examples and models to use for federal legislation.
Okay.
So when I worked in the White House with President Obama, when I worked in the Senate for Senator Obama and Sherrod Brown, who's Senator from Ohio, and Nancy Pelosi, which were my jobs on the Hill, we were always looking for that like local story or local idea that had an impact and was a unique or innovative way to address a problem that's impacting others in the country. So not only are you helping your own community, you're potentially serving as a model to help others across the country. So that's why it's just really a force multiplier.
No, I love that. So I'm actually currently working on like another bill. I don't know if it's been introduced. You have to ask Assemblywoman McKnight about the appraisal process. So, Will, like, you and I have kind of like privately discussed like my concerns with the appraisal process, and I remember I was surprised when I saw the current, administration and our current president, President Biden, talk about like acknowledging the appraisal process. There is unfortunately racism like just woven all through. And I experienced it myself personally, the home that I live in now.
Yep.
It was appraised for about $40,000 under. At first I wasn't sure. And then the New York Times did a story where I was included. They did their own independent appraisal a few weeks after the appraisal that I got that I felt was low. And sure enough, they found it was about $40,000 under. But what was really kind of terrifying was that it wasn't a matter of, well, potato, potato, the way my home was appraised was intentionally underappraised because there are codes that's assigned to your home. And my home, although my husband and I at the time, we had just moved in, not even 6 months. There was literally still stickers on the window. Every doorknob was new, every hinge, because we renovated it, gutted this like 100-year-old place. And they even exclaimed at how beautiful a renovation that they assumed someone else did when they were here. And what they put in our appraisal paperwork that our home was a wear and tear home. Like that was the code.
Right.
So not a code
Yeah,
of
you
like,
mentioned that.
yes. So that's not accidental when you say, wow, because there's a code for fully renovated
Sure.
or new or broken down. And they purposely gave us a code that did not match the home to their own admission. And then they used that code to then use comps, right? That were broken down homes, wear and tear homes. And so it left our home undervalued. And at the time I did not know what to do. Spoke with Angela and she said, let's see if this is a bill that we can introduce and get a law passed. So I'm sharing that because 64% of wealth in the United States is really based on home ownership. Right. And unfortunately, Black and brown people, especially Black people, we under-indexed in home ownership, but then also the value of our homes. On average, a Black home is undervalued at about $40,000, which I think is it the Brookings? What is that report?
Brookings, yeah.
And I think it cost the Black community well over $1 billion, right?
Oh, absolutely. And we actually have a case. It was also in the New York Times, I think last month maybe, but there was like an extreme case of this where a family when they had the appraisal, Black family, it appraised for $472,000. And then when they were like, there's no way, because we bought it for $450 and we put a new water heater in, we did all this stuff, we did all and the comps and everything. But then when when they got appraised and thought it was a white home, it appraised for $750,000. So like almost a $300,000 gap.
Crazy.
And because they didn't get the appraisal they wanted, their loan was denied. Yes. They were trying to refinance. And so it's just that's an extreme example. Yeah. But yeah, the average of 40,000, that is a direct, you talk about the racial wealth gap. Yes. I mean, it's a huge issue.
Yes. And so this is when we're talking, one of the reasons why I wanted Will to come on here and kind of explain how do you actually get laws passed on the local, state and federal level is because like that, getting something like that passed on the local level. And I'm so glad that you shared that, Will, that like at the state level, this is what you've seen they look for. So getting a law passed on like a local level for this or at a state level can potentially have, the federal government looking to say, hey, what can we put in place to make this like absolutely illegal? And then there are punishments in place if you engage in this, and that would dramatically affect the value of Black homes, which would dramatically affect like this racial wealth gap. And what is that statistic, Will? By 2050, if we continue, the Black community continues in the same vein that we have financially, that would be officially bankrupt. Isn't that the statistic?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. And some states are worse than others, but there's like a 13-to-1
Yes.
white Black racial wealth gap. Our state is about 8-to-1, but still significant. And and so much of it, as you said, is tied up into, to home ownership, but also the cost of everything, right? Like, the volatility, I just passed a rent stabilization bill in my county, and we have, 1.1 million people, 40% just about are renters. So you're talking about over 400,000 people. And a lot of people are renting now. And obviously we want to encourage pathways to home ownership, but we also don't want people to go broke while they're trying to live, because the stability of a home, whether it's rental or owned, is so important for so many other health indicators, school mobility, your overall health, your ability to get to a job, transportation. And, so we capped the increase at 3% plus inflation, which in a normal year is somewhere, inflation is normally 1-2%, but we capped it at 6%. So it can't go any higher than 6%.
Okay.
And one of the reasons we did that is because you were seeing people get these increases of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50%, and there's no protection. And when you have 40% of your population renting, that type of volatility, and I don't have to tell you disproportionately they're Black and brown.
Of course.
So, so it's just those type of protections are just so important.
So what do you hope? Like, I mean, so Mandy is currently, quote unquote, not here, although she's listening. Hey, Amanda girl. Because of childcare. Like, I know that, that is, you have, 4 beautiful children of your own. Like, what are some things that you could see yourself in the Senate, but also just locally? Like, what are options for like making childcare more affordable? I know Mandy said what really saved her is that recently universal preschool was brought to, like Newark has that, like the Abbott program. I don't know if they still have Abbott, but they have preschool that's for 3 and 4-year-olds. You don't have to pay. Because my sister had 2 kids, I remember, in daycare, $2,200 a month. I'm like,
yep.
How does one afford that? So yeah, what are some things that, what are some solutions that you've thought of or maybe passed that you can share with us?
Yeah. So, well, one, this is one where there needs to be things happening at both the local, state, and federal level, because ultimately we need a federal child care program that makes care for 3 and 4-year-olds, free, and gives money to states, and like District of Columbia, they have it free for all 4-year-olds now. Maryland, we don't have that. We have subsidies. And it's a patchwork across the country. This is where we need federal intervention, because, like you said, the average for a 4-year-old in Maryland, if you take the whole state, is about just under 11,000 a year, right? But if it's an infant, it goes up to over almost 16,000. And in some parts of our state, like Montgomery County, where I live, it can be 20,000 a year, which, like you said, is like, for one child. And so obviously most people can't pay that. So we have to dramatically increase the amount of subsidies that we give and create federal programs. The other thing we can do in the interim, and that I've done at the local level, is we created a guaranteed income pilot where we give $800 a month to 300 low-income families, and they use it. A lot of them use it for childcare or their housing, because we just squeeze people too much. We've squeezed them on housing costs. We've squeezed them on childcare. We've squeezed them on healthcare, cost of higher education. And so when you just add all that up, it's just, there's no room. There's no room. And you have to relieve that pressure. So, I think ideally you set up a government system at the state and or federal level that provides that care, because it's not only good for those families, it's good for the country. 90% of brain development happens before you're 5 years old. My children, children that have access to pre-K and early childhood education, when they start kindergarten, they have millions more words than kids that
Mm,
have not had any formal care.
mm,
And that starts that opportunity achievement gap from
yes.
day one. And so it's just not even smart for us as an economy. So there's so many reasons to do it. It's going to cost money though. There's no way around it.
Hmm.
But you've seen states in some jurisdictions say we're going to do it.
Yes.
And it's just, we have to keep building that movement because the prices are just continuing to rise. And at the same time, we don't pay the workers well, right?
Mm,
So you have this thing where that's why it needs a federal government intervention, because childcare workers are some of the lowest paid,
yes.
hardest workers. And so you have this thing where it costs crazy money, but they're also, the people that are involved are paid so little. So
Hmm.
that just is begging for a governmental solution because
Yes.
the market is not handling it.
Yes. No, you're right. Because I remember distinctly back then that like each child, we were getting paid $9,000 per child. But
Right.
it wasn't reflected. I was like, but then why am I still buying all the scissors and the tape and the glue?
Right,
And I
right, right.
was like,
And those are kids that aren't like babies, right? Those are like,
yeah, three and
older
four. I
kids.
taught preschool, 3 and 4. And I still
Right,
came out of
right.
pocket tremendously in order to support my kids. So I have a question. This is a little like a aside, but I've been hearing more and more and more, my senator, Cory Booker, and I think is it Ayanna?
Presley?
Presley, yes. I can't, where is
Yeah.
she? Where?
She's in the Boston area, like Massachusetts. She's
Yes.
congressman from
So I have
Massachusetts.
seen her talk. So Boston is crazy. So their racial wealth gap is the average black family, their net worth is $8. Eight. And then the average white family in Boston, 200,000. That is criminal. So anyway,
Yeah.
I've seen the both of them. Like I guess they've partnered together to really try to address some of this via reparations, like having like that baby bond. And so, like, can you
Yep.
maybe just share like what's like what what's the buzz on like what reparations and like how likely do you think something like that is possible?
That's a great question. And actually, I'm getting ready. I'm actually drafting a baby bond bill right now.
Okay.
There's two. Connecticut has one.
Hmm.
As the first, they were the first state last year to develop one.
Hmm.
There are some other jurisdictions that, like cities, that have them.
Hmm.
And we would be actually the first county in the country to have one. But I think that is a form, like a really viable form of
Hmm.
reparations, because you can target it. The other thing is the Supreme Court, with knocking down the affirmative action
Hmm.
cases, this current Supreme Court, which we also need to change, and I have a plan on that too. We need some ethics reform. I think we need to look at expanding the court. The country has grown. We've expanded it in the past. We have to get out of, you had a vast majority of this court now was appointed by a twice impeached, criminally charged
Child,
president.
yes.
It's not in a good place, but baby bonds are a really effective way because they can be targeted to Medicaid. Like in the one in
Mm,
Connecticut is targeted to Medicaid recipients,
okay.
which are disproportionately Black and brown, and that allows, that I think at the end it gets to about, their initial investment is like $3,500, and it will grow to somewhere between 16 and 25,000 when the child turns 18,
Okay.
which could be used to go to school, could be used for a house, down payment, could be used for a lot of different things.
Okay.
But the larger reparations talk, I think, is one that we need to have, because if you've done any sort of racial equity training or know any history of this country,
Hmm.
wealth was systematically denied
Hmm.
to Black families and other groups, but primarily and always. There were other types of discrimination against Asian Americans and white immigrants at some point,
Hmm.
and other people, but the one constant, Black people were always excluded.
Hmm.
When you talk about redlining, like where people were given loans to buy homes, there were communities where Jewish folks were excluded and other types of white immigrants were excluded, but that eventually changed. But always 100% Black folks were
Hmm.
excluded.
To this
And
day.
so, yeah, to this day. And so you were talking about the appraisals. You still have the legacies and that in effect. So I think my personal view on reparations is that you got to study it. There are some places. I have a good friend who's a local elected official in Evanston, Illinois. The sister, they were the first municipality to pass a local reparations where they actually gave checks, or did the analysis and figured out how to give money to descendants of enslaved people in
Okay.
Evanston. So California just had a big study and a report that came out. There's a bill that Cory Booker and others, like you said, Ayanna Pressley have to try to do a similar type of commission to look at the issue. I personally think there's a lot of ways to attack the racial wealth gap.
Mhm.
Baby bonds are one, guaranteed income is another, investments in childcare and education are another. But there also is an argument for direct investment into communities, into individuals that have been historically uh, excluded
Mhm.
from government. If you think about the GI Bill, the Homestead Act,
Mhm.
policies that gave certain veterans, certain white people, not black people, land for free
Yes.
or houses for free or education for free.
Mhm.
You can't have that. And that's not that long ago, some
Yep.
of these policies. So I think we absolutely need that conversation, but we need to put it in the context of history. That's why we're being told by DeSantis and others right now
Mhm.
that slavery benefited us. And of course it didn't. And all these other crazy things, because they know if you tell the real history,
Yes.
that you can't come to any other conclusion of that you have to do something about it to
Yes.
correct it.
So, well, my last question to you is: so you're running for Senate. So when does that election come up?
It's May 14th, 2024 is the primary
Mhm.
election, and then November, same time as the president. So in Maryland, we vote in May for the primary, and then November is the general next year. So about 9.5 months.
So what can people do if they hear this and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm in California," or "Oh my gosh, I'm in Ohio, but I like what he's talking about. I want to support, like I have a cousin that lives in Maryland, so certainly I can make a phone call, but how can people connect with you and support you, on this run if they feel aligned with your mission?
Yes, they can go to willjawando.com, WILLJAWANDO.com, and they can sign up to donate there. They can sign up to volunteer. They can see, what I'm about, read about me. And I'm just at Will Jawando on all social media. And like we talked about earlier,
Mhm.
there's 100 U.S. senators in this country that vote on everything that affects everybody here. So, and there's not a lot of people that look and have like me or have my experience. So I think we need more of that in the Senate.
No, I think so too. Thank you so much, Will. You're so awesome. And honestly, thank you for always being a good friend, but also for being truly a servant leader. You don't see too many servant leaders. I mean, like I said, you did that wealth walk with us. They loved it. You're here back again. And, you've really committed your life to be in service to all people, but especially, carving out a space for Black and brown people to make sure we get seen, heard, and looked after. So we thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for doing the same thing, Tiff. Love you much.
Love you too. All right, y'all. I hope you loved this episode. You know you did. So share it with a friend, tell a friend. And I'll see you for BAQA later on this week. But go ahead and, follow Will, learn more about him because it is important. We are not just here to take care of our internal homes, but we live in a larger, broader community and there is something you can do about it. And I hope you left feeling as encouraged and inspired as I did. Until next week, stay Black and brown. Bye. Hey, BA fam. We're on YouTube. Woohoo! Thank you so much for watching. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel.
And while you're at it, why don't you go over to that little bell icon and just tap that for us. Show the BA fam how much you love us. And that way you'll also get notifications when new videos drop. Also, share the channel with a friend. We're always like, tell a friend, tell a friend, tell a friend. And thank y'all so much again for all the support.